Night settled over the uneven rooftops of Istanbul, where glass towers rose beside centuries-old stone buildings, and the Bosphorus glimmered like a restless silver thread. On the top floor of an unfinished apartment block, half construction site, half hideout, three young people sat in a circle, surrounded by concrete dust and the hum of distant traffic. Mina kept her jacket wrapped tight around her shoulders, Jero fidgeted with a flashlight, and Elias, older, quieter, strangely calm, watched the two of them with an expression that was almost gentle. He had called them here after sunset. No explanation. Just a message, come to the roof. There's something you need to understand. Mina finally broke the silence. So, what's this really about? You sounded serious. Elias leaned back against a stack of unused bricks, his voice steady. It's about something people misread for 2,000 years. Something hidden in plain sight because nobody wanted to believe it literally. Jero scoffed lightly. You're talking about that old saying again. The one you showed us last time. Elias nodded. The one from the fragment scholars keep arguing about. But they argue because they assume it's poetry. They assume it's metaphor. They assume nobody meant what they said. His eyes flickered with the rooftop lights of the city stretching behind them. But the line wasn't poetic. It was technical. Mina hugged her knees. You mean that part about the kingdom being inside and outside? Yes, Elias replied softly. People think it means God is everywhere or that holiness is a feeling in your heart. But that wasn't the intention. It was a literal description of human consciousness, and of what you are when you stop accepting the story you were told. Jero tapped his flashlight against the concrete. So what? We're supposed to take it literally. That's extreme. It's only extreme, Elias said, because you've been taught to treat yourself as a creation instead of an expression. Mina frowned. Expression of what? The original source. The unity behind all existence. What the old texts called the monad. His tone carried no force, no persuasion, only quiet certainty. The rooftop wind shifted, carrying distant sounds of fairies and prayer calls drifting over the city. Elias continued. People think they're separate from the divine. They imagine a being in the sky who made them. But the early writings didn't describe humans that way. They described something far stranger, and far more intimate. They said consciousness didn't create you as an outside project. It became you. It took on form. He paused, letting the words settle. Not a spark inside. Not a piece loaned to you. You are that source, wearing a temporary shape. Jero's expression shifted from skepticism to unease. So you're saying we're fragments? Fragments that aren't really fragments, Elias said. Think of a candle lighting another candle. The flame spreads, but it's still the same fire. The early teachers tried to explain this. They said the source chose to distribute itself into countless forms, not as servants, not as worshippers, but as itself, experiencing limitation from the inside. Mina exhaled slowly, a hint of recognition in her eyes. That feeling, the one where you don't fit anywhere. Where everything feels like a half-remembered dream. You're saying that's why? Yes. Elias's smile was faint but warm. Most people move through life just playing the script. They chase status, money, approval. It works for them because they match the frequency of this place. But some of you never matched it. You feel like you arrived from somewhere else and can't remember where. Like the world is slightly blurred around the edges. Because you did come from somewhere else, in a sense. Not another planet. Another state of being. Jero rubbed his forehead. But that's impossible. We're human. Biology, nerves, memories. That's all. Biology is the costume, Elias replied. A temporary interface. Something the deeper consciousness uses to explore this realm. And that deeper consciousness is what the old writers tried to protect before their work was altered, trimmed, rewritten. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small notebook, edges worn, pages full of scribbles. He flipped to a page showing a simple diagram, a circle representing unity, branching into 4 parts. This was the original teaching, he said. A 4-fold expression of the one source. But centuries later, one branch was removed. The one representing what the divine becomes when it enters matter. His eyes lifted to the 2 of them. The one representing you. Mina blinked, stunned. They removed people. They removed the idea that a person could be an emanation of the source rather than a subject of it, Elias clarified. Because if people realized they weren't worshippers but participants, co-equal expressions, the entire structure of power collapses. Jero swallowed hard. You're saying institutions kept the version that makes people dependent. They kept the version that makes you small, Elias answered. Because small people obey. Small people fear. Small people surrender their power. But the fragments that remembered, even just faintly, were harder to contain. The wind quieted. The city lights shimmered like distant signals. Mina's voice softened. And what about us? Why tell us all this? Elias studied her face, then Jero's. Because you've both felt the difference your whole lives. Exile, homesickness, a sense that the world doesn't quite attach to you. You aren't broken. You're remembering. And once remembering begins, it can't be undone. Mina stared at her hands. It feels like you're describing something I've always known but never had the words for. That's because I'm not giving you new information, Elias said gently. I'm giving you vocabulary for something old inside you. Jero shook his head. But why us? Why now? Because more people are waking up to it, Elias replied. And when the recognition spreads, the systems built on fear and obedience start trembling. His jaw tightened slightly. Some groups don't want that. Groups? Mina echoed. People who benefit from others forgetting what they are. People who have built entire identities on being gatekeepers. People afraid of losing authority. Mina exchanged a nervous glance with Jero. So what happens now? Now, Elias said, we go deeper. Because knowing the truth intellectually is only the beginning. You have to feel it in your awareness. You have to see how it changes you, how it rewrites the smallness you inherited. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. And there is something else you need to know. Something about a phrase. A recognition statement. Ancient teachers used it to help their students remember what they were when their minds were drowning in fear and conditioning. Jero raised an eyebrow. A phrase? Like a mantra? Not a mantra, Elias corrected. A declaration. Something said aloud, not to ask for power, but to acknowledge what's already present. Mina felt a shiver crawl down her spine. You're going to teach it to us? Not yet. Elias shook his head. You're not ready to hear it. Not until you understand how the forgetting happened. And why it was engineered. Jero's breathing grew shallow. You mean we were meant to forget? To survive here, yes, Elias said. To function in a world not designed to let infinite consciousness operate freely. He stood and brushed concrete dust from his jeans. But forgetting isn't permanent. And remembrance isn't a miracle. It's a process. Mina rose slowly. Elias, what are we supposed to do? Come back tomorrow night, he said softly. Same place. I'll show you the next piece. The city lights flickered behind him, painting him in gold and shadow. And once you see the full picture, he added, you'll never mistake yourselves for something small again. He started walking toward the stairwell, leaving Mina and Jero on the cold rooftop, two people on the edge of remembering something they had forgotten long before birth. Elias arrived before them the next night, sitting on the same unfinished rooftop, legs crossed, eyes scanning the haze of light surrounding the ancient city. Mina and Jero climbed the stairs quietly, each carrying the weight of unanswered questions from the night before. They had barely slept, thoughts lingering like echoes that refused to fade. Elias glanced up as they approached. Good. You came back. We didn't really have a choice, Jero muttered, though his voice lacked its usual edge. You said there was a next piece. And, well, you were right. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Mina nodded. That feeling you described, the homesickness, the strangeness, I thought it was just me. But it felt like you were describing something I've carried for years. Elias didn't smile, but there was warmth in his expression. That's because you weren't imagining it. And tonight, you're going to see just how far the forgetting goes, and how deliberately it was shaped. He placed his notebook between them, turning to the same diagram from the night before, a circle divided into 4 equal parts. But tonight there was an additional sketch, 3 highlighted sections, 1 dimmed and partially erased. This, Elias began, is the original structure of the teaching. For expressions of the same source consciousness. Not separate beings. Not hierarchy. Different ways the same unity experiences itself. Jairo leaned closer. Yesterday you said something about one part being deleted. Not deleted, Elias corrected softly. Cut out. Erased in translation. Replaced by something safer for the people in charge. He tapped the faded quadrant. This is the one that didn't survive the councils and rewrites. This is the part that scared them. Mina studied the drawing. What was it supposed to represent? The embodied expression of the source, Elias replied. The part that lives in matter. The conscious human who realizes what they are. He looked up at them. You. Jairo inhaled sharply. So you're saying we used to be part of some divine diagram? You still are, Elias said. But the narrative that surrounded you was rewritten so you'd never see it. Imagine a puzzle where one central piece is missing. The picture still exists, but nobody understands it properly anymore. They assume the gap is intentional. Mina sat down slowly, her voice quiet. But why remove this part? Why erase something so important? Elias tilted his head, as if listening to a sound beneath the wind. Because if people realized they weren't servants or followers or creations, but expressions of the same consciousness they were told to worship, the entire structure of authority dissolves. No priests. No middlemen. No hierarchy. Jairo frowned. But how did they manage to hide something that's significant? By rewriting the story, Elias said. By selecting which texts were allowed to survive. By burning the ones that contradicted the new structure. And by redefining the divine as something external, unreachable, separate. He paused. Because once the divine is external, people become manageable. The city glowed around them, car horns blending with the low hum of night ferries. Elias lifted the notebook again. There was originally a quaternity, he continued. A 4-part understanding, the source, the pattern, the movement, and the embodied expression. He gestured to the erased quadrant. This part said the human wasn't a distant creation. It said the human was the source operating inside form. Mina felt a chill run through her arms. So when that part was removed, humans were taught to believe they were, what? Inferior. Dependent, Elias corrected. In need of salvation. In need of guidance. In need of institutions. Anything except capable of recognizing their own origin. He flipped another page, revealing a list of dates. Over time, the three-part model became dominant. People forgot that the fourth part ever existed. They only saw what they were permitted to see. Jero rubbed his hands together. And for centuries, no one questioned it. Some did, Elias said. Groups hidden in deserts, mountains, forgotten valleys. Fringe communities the empire labeled heretics. But when power is centralized, alternative narratives get crushed. His voice hardened for a moment. And those who remembered were silenced. Mina looked at him closely. But you said yesterday that the memory isn't gone. Just buried. Exactly. Elias leaned forward. You can bury recognition. You can bury awareness. But you cannot destroy what is woven into consciousness itself. All you can do is distract it. Jero raised an eyebrow. Distract how? With fear. With shame. With stories that convince you to feel small. Elias tapped his chest. When you tell someone they're broken, sinful, fallen, weak, they spend their whole life trying to fix what was never broken. Mina whispered, so the system was designed to keep people from remembering their nature. Yes, Elias said. Not because the source made it so, but because human institutions did. He stood and walked toward the edge of the rooftop. The city stretched out beneath them like a glowing map, fragmented and alive. Elias spoke without turning around. But here is the irony. Even after centuries of rewriting, the truth still slipped through. In a sentence here, a phrase there, a metaphor nobody bothered to censor because they assumed people wouldn't notice. He turned slightly. But some of you did. Some of you felt it intuitively. You recognized yourself even when the story told you to forget. Mina stepped beside him. But how do we know which feelings are real? How do we know this isn't just something we want to believe? Elias's voice lowered. Because recognition feels different from belief. Belief is constructed from outside, words, teachings, institutions. Recognition comes from inside. It hits you like a memory you didn't know you had. He looked at her directly. And that's why you're here. Jero swallowed. So what happens now? What do we do with this missing part? You integrate it, Elias said. You put the piece back into the picture. Not intellectually, but experientially. He faced them fully now. Because once you understand why you were cut out of the story, you'll understand why remembrance feels like rebellion. Mina looked shaken. Rebellion against what? Rebellion against the idea that you're small. Elias lifted his notebook again, but this time he closed it, holding it between his palms like an offering. Tomorrow, he said, I'll show you the phrase. The recognition signal. The one the early teachers used to align the mind back to what it already is. But you must understand something first. He stepped closer, voice steady. Once you speak it, you cannot unknow its meaning. You cannot return to the old narrative. And once you feel the fourth part sliding back into place, the world will look very different. The wind swept over the rooftop, and for a moment, none of them moved. Jero whispered, "Are we ready for that?" "No one is ever ready," Elias replied. "But some are willing." He glanced at the skyline, gold light flickering across domes and minarets. "And the willing ones," he added softly, "are the ones who were cut out of the picture, and are finally stepping back into it." The third night arrived with a cold wind sweeping across the half-finished rooftop. Clouds drifted low, dimming the moonlight and deepening the shadows cast by the skeletal beams above them. Mina and Jero climbed the familiar stairs with an uneasiness neither of them wanted to voice. Everything Elias had revealed so far felt like it had rearranged the walls of their minds, and tonight, they sensed, would be different. Elias was already there, standing near the edge, gazing out across the Bosphorus as if waiting for a sign. When he heard their footsteps, he turned not with a smile but with a solemnity that carried weight. "Tonight," he said, "we finish what we started." Jero exhaled shakily. "So, this is when you tell us the phrase." "Yes," Elias replied. "But before I give it to you, you need to understand why it works, why something so simple can shift perception so deeply." Mina settled beside him, her breath visible in the cold air. "You called it a recognition signal." "It is," Elias said. "Not a prayer, not a request, and not a charm. It's an alignment. A way of speaking from the deeper layer of your awareness instead of the surface one you've been taught to identify with." He motioned for them to sit. They formed a small circle on the concrete, the city lights flickering below like distant constellations. "For thousands of years," Elias continued, "institutions taught people that the divine is external. A throne in the sky. A ruler above creation. A distant presence you must seek or beg from." His voice softened. "But that model was never meant to be universal. It was meant to keep you from remembering what you already are." Jero frowned. "But how can a phrase undo centuries of conditioning?" "Because recognition doesn't come from the mind," Elias answered. "It comes from the source itself, inside you. Once you speak certain words, not with belief, but with understanding, they resonate at the level that existed before you learned anything about the world. They wake up something ancient beneath your personality. Mina shivered, though not from the cold. And this phrase, it was used by the early teachers. Elias nodded. Quietly. Privately. Passed from one person to another. Not written down. Not meant for public recitation. Only for those who had reached a certain point, when the outer story no longer satisfied the inner sense of truth. He paused, searching their faces carefully. Everything you felt, your lifelong sense of not belonging, your resistance to submission, your intuitive rejection of external authority, these aren't flaws. They're signs of the deeper awareness trying to surface. The wind carried a distant fairy horn across the water. And now, Elias said, you are ready to hear what they protected. He lifted his notebook, not to read from it, but to close it. Slowly. Deliberately. The phrase, he said quietly, is, I am the source embodied. Mina's breath hitched. Jairo froze completely. Elias continued. 5 simple words. But when understood, they carry an entire cosmology. I am isn't the small personality speaking, it is existence recognizing itself. The source is the foundational consciousness behind all form. And embodied means that this consciousness is not outside you, it is appearing through you, temporarily clothed in matter. He leaned in, voice low but steady. When you speak these words, you are not becoming something. You are acknowledging what has always been true. Jairo swallowed. That feels like too much power to claim. It isn't a claim, Elias replied. It's a recognition. Power is only dangerous when misinterpreted as superiority. But recognition dissolves hierarchy entirely. When you know what you are, you harm no one. Because you see every other being, those awake and those asleep, as part of the same ocean. Mina looked down at her hands. So what happens when we say it? Elias took a moment to answer. For some, a warmth spreads through the chest. For others, a sense of expansion, or a sudden quiet. And for a few, nothing noticeable at all. But the change is internal, not dramatic. It shifts the position from which you perceive yourself. He stood and gestured for them to rise. And there is a protocol. You must follow it exactly. They stood, facing him. Tonight, he said, after you're alone, go to a dark room. No lights. No noise. Lie down or sit upright, whichever allows your breath to deepen. Close your eyes. Take 3 slow breaths, each one lower than the last. Then speak the phrase aloud. Not whispered. Spoken. Why aloud? Mina asked. Because sound vibrates matter, Elias said. Thought is soft. Sound resonates. and resonance reaches deeper layers of awareness. He raised a finger. You say it 3 times. The first time, you declare it. The second time, you recognize it. The third time, you anchor it. Jairo stepped forward. And then what? Meditation. Just silence, Elias sighed. 3 minutes of stillness. No effort. No visualization. Just awareness. Let the phrase settle. Let it ripple through you. He lowered his hand. You must do this for 7 nights. Not 6. Not 8. 7. Each night rewrites a layer of conditioning. By the 7th night, your awareness is no longer filtered through the story you inherited. Mina looked up at him. And after the 7th night, what changes? Elias met her gaze with a seriousness they had never seen in him. Everything. Your relationship with fear changes. Your relationship with authority changes. Your relationship with yourself changes. You stop looking outward for something that has always been inward. He stepped back. And once this recognition settles, you cannot return to the old version of yourself. The forgetting ends. Jairo rubbed his wrist nervously. What if we're not ready? No one ever thinks they are, Elias said gently. But readiness isn't a requirement. Willingness is. He looked at them both, his tone softening. And you wouldn't be here if you weren't willing. The wind howled briefly between the beams overhead. Elias walked toward the stairwell, then paused and turned back. Tomorrow, when you look in the mirror, you'll feel something different. A faint shift. A subtle steadiness. His eyes softened. That's the beginning. Mina whispered, "Thank you." Elias shook his head. "Don't thank me. This isn't my teaching. It never was. I'm just returning a piece that was taken from you." He descended the stairs, leaving Mina and Jairo alone with the phrase echoing in their minds. I am the source embodied. It lingered like a memory that had finally resurfaced. They stood together on the cold rooftop, staring out at the endless city lights, 2 human forms, 2 quiet awakenings, and one truth finally reclaiming its place. If you followed this journey to its end, then something inside you is already stirring. You didn't watch this by accident. You didn't arrive here randomly. A part of you, an older part, a quieter and deeper part, recognized these ideas long before they were spoken aloud. That recognition is the beginning of remembrance, and remembrance is the beginning of freedom. The world has spent centuries convincing you that the divine is distant and unreachable. That you are small. That you are fragile. That you must search endlessly for something greater than yourself. But every moment of your life, the source of existence has been moving through you, breathing through you, thinking through you. not as a metaphor. As a lived reality hidden beneath layers of conditioning. Whether you choose to speak the phrase tonight or simply sit with it, know this: recognition is patient. It doesn't force itself. It waits for the quiet opening in your awareness and expands gently, like dawn rising behind closed eyes. And once it rises, you can never fully return to the story of smallness. If this teaching resonated with you, if it felt like a memory rather than information, then you are part of a quiet shift happening around the world. More people are remembering. More people are awakening. And as each person remembers, the collective story begins to change. If you'd like to continue exploring these ideas, stay close. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next step. Leave a like so this teaching reaches others who have been waiting for a sign. And share it with someone who feels different, someone who has always sensed a deeper truth beneath the noise. Your journey is just beginning.